What's the best way to connect with a politician to share your policy ideas or make a policy ask? In person, of course. Meetings are one of your most powerful tools because it gives you one-on-one time with the elected official you're trying to educate and influence. But how do I get a meeting? And once I have one, how do I make the best use of it? Stick around to find out. Hi everyone, I'm David Smith and I run Inthrive Advocacy Solutions, your solution for lobbying, advocacy, and strategic planning. Before launching this firm, I was leading advocates in Virginia and we brought real changes to our criminal justice system. I also worked for a senior legislator in the House of Delegates where I ran her commerce and energy docket. Now, I'm bringing what I've learned through mentors and hard knocks to you. Welcome to Better Advocacy in 10 minutes or less. This is a series of videos helping you become a better advocate so you can turn your passion into policy. Today, we're talking about meetings with legislators and how to get them. And we're going to be focusing on the preseason, that time when the legislature is not in session. Now, it's a different environment during session, and we'll be covering that in a different video. All right, so let's hop right on in. How do you get those meetings? Because, trying to get a meeting with a legislator can seem like one of the most daunting tasks. You may try to talk yourself out of it by saying your idea is not good enough yet, or you don't have enough supporters to make it worth their time. But your idea is good enough, and you do have enough supporters. Maybe you've bought into the narrative that you have to be a big donor or have lots of connections to get a meeting. That may be true for the president or even your governor, but not for legislators, especially state legislators. You simply ask them. Yep, just call up their office or email their official address. You'll likely talk to their aide, and that's okay because their aide is the gatekeeper that controls their schedule. Since this is the preseason and they likely aren't swamped, you should be able to get a meeting as long as you can work with their schedule. But if you really want to make sure they say yes, you need to have a good reason to talk to them. Now, this isn't your policy ask, it's your meeting ask. You need to convince them why you are important to them. Now, if you're a constituent, lead with that. Constituents will almost certainly get an in-person meeting. Now, I've known some constituents to get a reputation for being combative, so they're pushed to the side or the aide takes those meetings very dismissively. But for the most part, if you're a constituent and treat your legislator with respect, both in tone and time, don't be asking for meetings every couple of weeks, then you'll likely always get that meeting. But if you're trying to turn your passion into policy, then you'll need more than just your legislator on your side. You need committee chairs, committee members, and party leaders. When you're making appointments with committee members and committee chairs, be sure to tell them you expect your legislation to come before their committee next session. They want to be educated today about what's happening tomorrow, and you'll get that meeting. But what if you're just trying to raise awareness? There is no bill, or the legislator will see your bill for the first time on the floor since it's not going to their committee. In these cases, be upfront. Tell them, I know you probably won't see this until it gets to the floor, but I wanted to introduce you to it now. This increases your standing in their eyes because it shows you've done your homework and you understand the way the legislative process works. They understand it as an educational opportunity for them. All right, congratulations! You have your meeting scheduled. But now what? How do you use that time? There are 3 different things that will be happening during your meeting: relationship building, policy education, and a policy ask. Now, sometimes, but not always, this last one. You may be asking, what does relationship building have to do with getting my passion turned into policy? Isn't it about the merits of what I'm proposing? I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again and again. The key to turning your passion into policy is relationship building. Yes. See, when I started doing advocacy, yep, that's me way back when at my first press conference, I thought it was all about well-reasoned arguments and sound policy. But I should have known because relationships are how I got my first policy win. I was working on getting legislation passed, but I didn't know what to do, so I went to the delegates I had some sort of connection with. Yep, a relationship. I went to my current delegate and gave her my pitch. She was a Democrat, and she signed on to the bill and introduced me to several of her Democratic colleagues, and they all signed on. Then I went to my old delegate, a Republican I used to live about a street away from in a small city. Even though I'd never met him, I shared this connection and then my ask. He immediately said yes and introduced me to several Republican colleagues who all signed on. I realize now that was because they saw the residential connections as a relationship. But if you don't have that constituent connection, how do you build a fruitful relationship? Good old fashioned small talk. Yes, for some that are lucky, this comes easy. But for others, kind of like myself, it can feel rather tedious. But it's how you find commonalities and build community. Spend a little time researching the legislature. More on that in this old video here that I've posted. And you'll be able to find common interests. If you two really don't have anything in common, then compliment them on something you know about their community or themselves. Politicians take pride in those spaces. But when you take the time to notice something good in these areas, it causes them to see you in a more positive light. All this helps to build the relationship. All right, so you're meeting with them to talk policy, right? Eventually, you have to make that transition. When you do, you're either educating them or you're making an ask. In an ideal world, you're doing education before session starts. So let's pretend you have a meeting where your only goal is to educate them about your policy. Here we're going back to the two-step method. Yep, that old video. But with an extra step in the middle. You start with the problem, educate them to why this is an issue. What hurt is being caused by the status quo? What groups are impacted? How is it hurting their constituents? Or if this is an issue that only directly impacts certain communities that might not be constituents, why is it hurting them? You are stating the problem. Then transition into why this is important to you. Make that personal connection. This is especially important if you don't have a strong relationship with the legislator. By sharing succinct and personal details about how this impacts you directly, then they can see your passion. And when you show your passion in an authentic way, that helps make a connection with the legislator and makes them more likely to support your ask. Remember, this is how I won those legislative supporters that first time I asked for allies. Now that they see what the problem is and why it's important to you, then you transition into solutions. Yes, here is where you present your ideas about how to solve the problem. That's the second part of the two-step method. If you're in a meeting where your goal is education, you're not asking for their support. You're asking if they understand what you're presenting. What is self-evident to you and your lived experience may not be self-evident to someone with different life experiences. If things go well, they'll want to read more about your issue. Be ready with reports and hard data. Things like journal articles or long-form, well-researched newspaper clippings are helpful. Often, it's easier to have digital copies of these so you can drop them in a follow-up email. Once your time is up or you feel like it's a good stopping point, whichever happens first, thank them for their time and beyond your way. You don't want to overstay your welcome. Though some legislators love to talk, so if you have the time, listen as long as you can. It helps to build that relationship. 2 important points. 1. Don't make something up if you don't have an answer to a question. Tell them you don't know that point, but you will find an answer. Then find it. And number 2, always follow up with legislators and their staff after the meeting. Thank them for their time. Include some digital clippings if applicable, and let them know you're here for them to answer any questions. The other purpose for a meeting is a policy ask. You're not trying to educate them, though that's part of it sometimes. You want to leave the meeting with a commitment from them. So what are some things you might ask a legislator to do? Maybe patron a bill, vote for a bill, or don't cause a scene about my bill, please. All right, you don't just ask anyone to be a bill patron. Check out my video on picking patrons. You want somebody who is knowledgeable on your topic, is willing to fight for it, and ideally, you already have a relationship with. You've already educated these folks. You either have a bill text you've drafted, a piece of model legislation from a national organization, or a clear list of asks that their aide can give the state drafters. Tell them in advance you want to ask them about patroning a bill. In the meeting, have copies of your model bill, supporting documentation, and anything else they may need. This should be a friendly ask. You're asking someone who already knows and supports your position. It might seem intimidating at first, but legislators are always looking for new legislation, so you're actually making their job easier by giving them a researched bill. Next up, asking for a yes vote. For these meetings, have a copy of your bill and any supporting documentation. Sell your bill with that two-step method of problem solution. Ask what questions they have, and then ask for their support. This can be in the form of a co-patron request or simply to vote yes. They'll probably ask why someone wouldn't support this bill, be honest, while still speaking positively about your bill. They'll want to know who from their party is supporting it, so if you already have some other supporters lined up, have that list ready. Final type of meeting is a more advanced meeting. We'll call it a level up meeting. This is when you ask a legislator that's opposed to your legislation not to put up a fuss about it. I've seen so many pieces of legislation die in committee or subcommittee because one legislator in the majority digs into some random detail and ends up derailing the bill's momentum, and it dies. This usually happens because that legislator doesn't know the details or no one has spent the time to talk to them, and now they feel excluded. By spending the time to talk to opponents before the bill comes before their committee or subcommittee, you're not going to change their mind, but you will temper their opposition. Let's be honest. You're not going to change someone from a gun rights to a gun restrictions position. And let's also be honest, most issues aren't this heated. But if they feel seen and respected, they're less likely to make a scene of your bill. Now, when I work on criminal justice issues, I always make it a point to talk to the hard-on crime legislators. Not because I expect to get their vote, but because I want them to see the face of the other side, to humanize the issue. As I said, I rarely get their votes, though it's happened, and the bill sometimes still die in a partisan party line vote, but my bills don't usually have the vitriol you hear in other debates. All right, I hope this short video has shown you the way you can get meetings with legislators and how to use them effectively. What's been your experience? Do you have other strategies? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe to the Inthrive Advocacy channel to get notifications of new videos. Be sure to check back every Friday for a new Better Advocacy in 10 minutes or less video.